Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and once again, thank you for stopping by. It's appreciated. Mindspeak returns on Saturday, the 25th at Intercontinental. Dr. Naikuni, the CEO of Kenya Airways, where he's been for 10 years, is our guest. We serve breakfast from 9:30 a.m. and we start at 10. I'll put up a photograph that we took of Titus and myself about 490 days ago. Looking forward to seeing him today. And there's also a link for previous interviews with Dr. Naikuni on the website. On that note, I'll put up a photograph I took of the sunrise on a Kenya Airways flight as I was going down to Mombasa. And I'll also put up another photograph of the Boeing 777 78 days ago. And clearly we're in this moment of maximum transformation of the airline because of the arrival of the new planes, of which the 777 was actually a precursor to the Dreamliners. I wrote a piece over the weekend about Africa correlations to the taper, and if you have a chance, do have a look at that. My home thoughts return to Peter Grest, who's a friend of mine, and I'll put up a photograph of him in my office 104 days ago, and there's just no way he is the person that could possibly be accused of what he's been accused of in Egypt, and really it's very, very sad indeed, and I hope he gets released. I mean, if anything, he's an atheist in my view. I'll put up 3 photographs of Mount Kenya, one taken 825 days ago. The second one was taken 294 days ago, and the final one was taken less than a month ago when I was visiting Mount Kenya Safari Club, and it really is a marvelous place, and it's quite interesting to see whether it's changed over that period of time. And then finally I'll put up a photograph of Nairobi City as I saw it this morning at 7:15, and that took me back to Gravity's Rainbow, which starts as screaming comes across the sky. It has happened before, but there is nothing to compare it to now. And you'll see on that photograph of Nairobi there's some kind of something across the sky. Dear subscriber, you are registered as a participant in a mass riot. This was the message received by mobile phone users present near the scene of violent clashes in Kiev early on Tuesday morning, in what appeared to be a novel attempt by authorities to quell the protests that have swept through the city and turned violent on Sunday night. Riot police, I put up a photograph of them blocking a street in Kiev, and I just saw a headline that one demonstrator has been shot dead. But the point was, that is, we're in this sort of crazy new world of surveillance, and that's extraordinary that they can pinpoint, well, all the technologies there, that they can pinpoint an issue with such an SMS. International markets, the IMF put out an update, their economic update, just to give you the key takeaways. Growth in emerging market and developing economies to increase to 5.1% in 2014, up from 4.7% in 2013. Advanced economies to increase to 2.2% in 2014, up from 1.3% in 2013. The recovery is strengthening. World growth forecast to be 3.7% in 2014 from 3% in 2013. The headline is the tide rising? They're basically calling Europe 1% GDP growth in 2014, 1.4% in 2015, but calling the recovery still uneven. The UK has been buoyed by easier credit conditions and increased confidence. Growth is expected to average 2.25% in 2014-2015, but economic slack will remain high. Japan, 1.7% in 2014, before moderating to 1% in 2015. I wrote about this on the 12th of August 2013 when I said the recovery in the West is not a mirage, it is real. And clearly this IMF economic outlook is agreeing with that. If you have a chance, do have a look at the Mindspeak session with Madame Christine Lagarde. The euro is at 135.61, dollar index 81.08, Japanese yen 104.18. That snapped a losing streak. Swiss franc 0.9102, pound 164.80. Aussie rebounded to 0.8863, and remember it touched 0.8757 on Jan 20. India rupee 61.945, South Korean won softer 1068.20, Rial 236.06, Egyptian pound 696.21, and the South African rand a little bit firmer 1083.54. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index. That was last when I checked 81.08, and it's sort of grinding higher, isn't it, at the moment? Euro dollar, I'll put up a 3-month chart 135.61. I remain bullish. I'm still long at 133.80, and I'll keep my stop there. Dollar yen 104.18, and it has had the yen has had the best start to a year since 2010 against the dollar. Policymakers stuck to a pledge to buy about $67.3 billion of government bonds a month to spur 2% inflation. The governor is due to hold a press conference later today in Tokyo. Japan's currency has strengthened 2.6% against the euro and 1.2% against the dollar so far this year. Gold, I'll put up a 1-year chart, 1243.05. Last I looked for a $1,000 print in 2014. Interestingly, we're now at 1243.05, averaged 1410.89 in 2013 and 1668.75 in 2012. Goldman Sachs reckoning it's going to come down to 1050 in the next 12 months. Crude oil, I'll put up a 5-day chart. That's had a nice rebound, $95.34. Last, I think you've got to sell rallies in front of a deluge of uranium supply, in my opinion. This was the highest close since January the 2nd. Coming to sub-Saharan Africa, the IMF is forecasting 4.8% growth in sub-Saharan Africa in 2012, 5.1% in 2013, 6.1% in 2014, which will make sub-Saharan Africa second only to China in terms of growth in that year, and 5.8% in 2015. South Sudan's President Salva Kiir has accused the UN peacekeeping mission of acting like a parallel government. The UN had only fallen short of naming the chief of UN mission co-president, he said in a national TV address. And he's probably concerned that the UN is about to process the deployment of an extra 5,500 peacekeepers to South Sudan to bring its forces up to 12,500. In his speech, Mr. Kiir also accused other humanitarian organizations of supporting Mr. Machar. And reading an article in The Independent, I picked up on this. Even if the crisis ends soon, South Sudan could face a huge reputational shock. And I think that's the issue. In the same article in The Independent, the big powers, especially the Chinese, have a huge stake in this, said Laban Morrow, a professor at the Center for Peace and Development Studies at the University of Juba. The elite in Khartoum and the elite in Juba learned a lesson from the 1-year shutdown of the oil in 2012 over a royalties dispute. For a while they were working on the idea that the other would collapse first, but they realized that they both could collapse at the same time. Now it seems they are more interested in collaborating for their joint survival. I wrote on the 30th of December last year that I think China would be wise no longer to count on South Sudanese oil. Mugabe, it turns 90 in exactly a month, made a couple of statements. I do not know how I have lived this long, he told mourners at the funeral of his sister Bridget. It's all in God's hands, he said. His grey bald was seen whispering and laughing with his wife Grace. Rumours prompted by his recent absence from the spotlight have been swirling around Harare in the last 2 weeks, some suggesting that the veteran leader was seriously ill, and others even suggesting he had died. His lieutenants dismissed the rumours as baseless. Mugabe managed to sprinkle his speech with anecdotes about his fondness for British history and tradition, joking that he still measured distance in miles, unlike most Zimbabweans who use kilometres. I am very British, I'm English again, don't forget, he told mourners. However, he then quickly changed tune, taking a swipe at the British political leaders he believes were trying to undermine him by backing opposition groups. In the July 31 election, he won by a landslide, albeit amid opposition cries of fraud. I think he won that fair and square. The British, up to now, don't know what hit them on July the 31st, he said. Wall Street Journal has got an interesting article about how Asian investors are seeking out opportunities in fast-growing Asia. It is a subscriber model on Wall Street Journal, so I've been rather naughty and put it all up on Rich Wrap-Ups, and it's quite interesting. It's saying that the MSI Africa Frontier Markets Index was up 25.8% in 2013, compared with 13.1% for Asia's frontier markets. The allure is the potential for fast growth, and saying in most of the emerging markets the growth momentum is declining, and all these big emerging markets are facing multiple problems like social, political and economic issues. African countries are at a good stage. All these countries have put a lot of effort to reducing inflation in the last 5 to 10 years. The economic conditions are much better than they were 10 years ago. And I wrote about this on the 30th of December in a piece I called Africa Remains in a Sweet Spot. The South African All Share is up 1.43% in 2014, dollar versus rand. I'll put up a 1-month chart, and you can see there's been some nibbling of the rand around these levels, and it's brought it back below 11, more towards 1083.19. And I was writing in my last article about the shockwave. I said, naturally there were around the taper, and then there were and still are concerns that the shockwave of the actual taper. There might therefore be a bleeding edge, slicing up peripheral assets in some kind of frenzied orgy of violence. And I was saying then, sure, the South African rand, which has actually been a kind of global proxy for risk, and still is at the bleeding edge of the taper. And last week was at 5-year lows versus the dollar, just a whisker below 11. And I said, if the taper turns helter-skelter, then the rand might even head to 12. And a lot of folks were predicting that Africa might turn out to be at the bleeding edge of the taper, but I don't think that's going to prove to be the case. The Egyptian pound was still below 7. The Egyptian stock market, best performing stock market in Africa this year, up 4.48%. Nigerian all shares up 1.46%. Bloomberg has a headline, Africa's richest man, Dangote, Mulls buying Nigeria oil fields, and saying, we're seriously thinking of investing in oil blocks, both for gas and for oil. We've started with talking with some companies who are divesting from onshore. We know the terrain much better, we know the risks, and we believe that the risks can be managed. The primary risk is people blasting your pipelines. I wouldn't like to go and invest in a block which is totally inland, and then I have to start buying inland pipelines. I had dinner with Aliko Dangote 1,020 days ago. Put up a photograph of that. Ghana Stock Exchange is up 2.92% this year. On that note, I'll put up a photograph of Maputo from the sea, taken 598 days ago. SABMiller, which is the world's second biggest brewer, reported growth in third quarter beer volume that missed analysts' estimates on declines in Europe and weaker than anticipated sales in Africa. Beer volume in Africa rose 6%, less than a 9% anticipated improvement. South African lager sales slid 2% amid a weaker economic and consumer environment. Political unrest in Mozambique, soft economic conditions in Uganda and Zimbabwe offset improvements in Tanzania, Zambia and Nigeria. And if you care to have a look, I'll put up a link to the entire commentary in particular about Africa, because it gives a lot of granularity about what's happening. Interesting piece on Beyond BRICS about Zimbabwe's sovereign wealth fund, and it starts off by saying a quarter, if not much. That's the truth, in my opinion. Mr. Gates says, don't let anyone tell you that Africa is worse off today than it was 50 years ago. Income per person has in fact risen in sub-Saharan Africa over that time, and quite a lot in a few countries. After plummeting during the debt crisis of the 1980s, it has climbed by 2/3 since 1998 to nearly $2,200 from just over $1,300. Today, more and more countries are turning towards strong, sustained development, and more will follow. 7 out of the 10 fastest growing economies of the past decade are in Africa, he said. Makes a case for big strides in health and education in sub-Saharan Africa. The lifespan for women has risen from 41 to 57 years since 1960, and would have gone up to 61 years were it not for the HIV epidemic. And generally talking positive story. A blue diamond has been found at the Cullinan mine this month. 29.6 carat blue diamond that can be worth millions of pounds has been discovered in South Africa. Petrodiamonds of the exceptional acorn-sized diamond was unearthed at the Cullinan mine near Pretoria. Put up a photograph of that. Coming now to Kenya, Barack Obama apparently is inviting President Kenyatta to an African Leaders Summit in Washington. And I wrote about this in that piece, Futures Not Seen in the Rearview Mirror, March last year, when I said, therefore, I remain of the view that realpolitik, security and business interests will temper the current ideological position. I said it does not make sense for our Western partners to lose us to the eager clutches of China and India. It does not make sense for us to lose our Western partners. We are better off being multipolar and multilateral in our relationships. Interesting article in Business Daily Africa, a shock of 120 billion hidden cost in the Chinese railway deal. The controversy surrounding the standard gauge railway tender deepened on Tuesday after the Treasury admitted a bilateral deal with China was shelved in favour of a commercial loan in order to circumvent scrutiny from Parliament. Treasury Secretary Henry Rotich told the Parliamentary Public Investments Committee that government did not sign any sovereign guarantees with China to secure funding for the project, which will now cost taxpayers 120.5 billion shillings more. There is no sovereign agreement that we have signed in this matter. If we were to sign such an agreement, the House will have to approve in line with Section 59 of the Public Finance Management Act. And a lot of detail about it. I wrote, I was writing about Lagarde, and the fact that it took me into a rabbit hole, let me read it to you. So there I am in a feedback loop, back to the day when I persuaded my directors at Credit Suisse First Boston to allow me to trade interest rate futures. I was given some chunky limits, and I'd finally reached the cockpit. There I was with a green light to seriously expand the balance sheet. It was an exciting moment. And what with the government all set to pull the trigger on a Eurobond in an amount not less than 1.5 billion and probably 2 billion if market conditions allow, a proposed supersized railway spend, it seems to me that there are parallels between my moment many years ago and Kenya's moment in 2014. Now, when you trade futures, the first thing is you need to be right directionally. You want to be buying something that is going up or selling something that is going down, otherwise you will be stopped out. I am certain that blowing up the balance sheet to spend on infrastructure is the right thing. We are a transit state, the gateway to world markets for the EAC, and in order to embed and entrench that gateway status, we need first-class infrastructure. A gateway needs a gatekeeper, and we can charge a fee. So I have no doubt that directionally, this is the right thing to do. In futures trading, there is a term called slippage, which means where you intended to buy something for 1,000 shillings a share and you end up paying 1,050. That's 50 shillings of slippage right there. Too much slippage is self-evidently a very bad thing. Good trades turn bad, and before too long you will be stopped out. The current news flow and the high-low price range around the railways is signalling elevated slippage risk. I'll put up a photograph from Mombasa Nairobi Railway that I took this time when I was visiting over Christmas, and another photograph of the railway crossing at Nyani Gate, Savo East, where we entered the Savo 26 days ago. There is a link to a 5-minute cut of the Kenya Ready for Takeoff conference at the back end of last year. There is also a link for Antoinette Sayé's speech. She's the director of Africa for the IMF. I'll put up a photograph of myself with Antoinette and with the central banker Njuguna Ndungu. And also there is a link for President Uhuru Kenyatta's speech at that conference. I'll put up a photograph of President Kagame stopping to admire the view of the Great Rift Valley. And I'll say a number of things on this point because it's extremely interesting. The President Kagame's deployment of social media is simply outstanding in the very 21st century. Look at that photograph and the message it's conveying. I'll just take you back to sequence. He was quite aggressive in some comments he made about garbage and about the consequences for people who turn against the government. The very next day, there was a deluge of tweets all showing Rwandan soldiers boarding American Air Force planes to go to the CAR. It is that ability to manage that communication ability, which I think is really pretty impressive, because there have been some tricky circumstances. I'm going to put up a photograph of a leopard in a tree that I found in the Samburu. Kenya shilling is at 85.848. The Nairobi All Shares up 3.81% so far this year in January. The NSE 20, I did an interview with CNBC Africa where I said I expected a 5% gain in the NSE in Nairobi All Share in January. We're getting there. The NSE 20 is up 3.01% in 2014, has closed above 5,000 since the 8th of January, was last at 5075. There is a link for every single listed share at the Nairobi Securities Exchange on Rich Wrap-Ups. And just to mention, 3 shares hit record highs yesterday. Safaricom up 8.294% in 2014. Market cap now is $5.465 billion. Diamond Trust is at a record high and has rallied 12.5% in 2014. And Brito up 23.102%, closed as a record high as well. I sincerely hope to see you at Mindspeed. And if you're more interested in the stock market, then please just register on rich.co.ke. It's free. Get a password. Go to Rich Live during trading hours to get the trading data. Otherwise, let's hope to see you at the Intercontinental on Saturday. Breakfast from 9:30. Once again, thank you kindly for stopping by.